would like to introduce our esteemed panelists today. Mike Bray from the Vancouver clinic in, I was going to say Oregon, but you're just over the border in Washington State, so apologies for the Portland nearness there. To David FINKELSTEIN from St. Luke's University Health System, and to Rob Perry from the Carilion Clinic down in Virginia. Gentlemen, why don't we start with Mike and give yourself a brief overview of who you are, what you do, and what your employers are up to at the moment. Mike, why don't you kick us off? And Mike, if you take the mute button off, we can all hear you.
It's a good way to start out. I'm not a morning person, so as Richard knows.
Well, it's early morning out there on the West Coast, and we do appreciate
so I get it at 6. That's really early for me. So I'm Michael Bray. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for the Vancouver Clinic. We're a privately owned mid-sized clinic that are owned by the providers. We have about roughly 300 to 400 providers, I believe, at this time. We're probably the largest entity of this type on the West Coast, Northwest for sure. I believe we're the only health clinic this large west of the Mississippi that's independently owned, which is awesome. At the same time, it gets a little scary because we have a lot of corporate folks that want to take us over. So we'll see how that goes. We're very busy with the COVID. We're knee deep. I handle all the security for the clinic. I'm also the HIPAA security official for the clinic. And then I'm dabbling with the compliance. I help the compliance chief compliance officer with developing a compliance program. So we're fast paced, fast growing. With COVID, we're still operating as we're going to be in business. So we're still expanding. We got multiple locations in development at this time. We've transitioned from a zero telehealth, pretty much maybe a 2% telework. So telehealth was zero, telehealth about 2%, to full-blown telehealth and full-blown telework. And in a 6-day period back when COVID first was kind of being announced, when the HIMSS convention was postponed or delayed and then canceled days before the event, we used that as an indicator of basically like a threat intelligence to rally and form a situation management team at that point and start to take proactive measures. So we've been basically rocking and rolling with COVID early March. So we got a head start with against most of the other folks we know. Other than that, we're extremely busy, working from home. Things are moving along pretty good though for us.
Living the life there up in the Pacific Northwest.
Yes, the sun's out.
I'm glad to hear the sun's made it already.
Yeah.
So, great. Well, thanks for joining us today, Mike. David, on to you, sir.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm the Information Security Officer for St. Luke's in Northeast Pennsylvania. Just like Mike, we're a medium-sized healthcare network. Got about 13 hospitals right now and growing, significant physician group practice. Probably covers about 60 square miles. We're right now in the form of COVID. I mean, we're helping to manage the obviously the initial issues that we had dealt with back in March, April, and May with the significant amount of volume, being right by New York, being by New Jersey. Our volumes were particularly high. And just like everybody else, we had to jump right into the virtual care environment, making sure that we could reach our patients and take care of all that stuff. So my primary job was to ensure that moving to that virtual care platform, going from, as Mike said, about 2%, which is where we were at, to about 80–90% virtual care for those couple of months, just figuring out all the varying security issues that were going to come to that. Also making sure that we get we've probably moved about 13,000 of our 17,000 employees remote back to their homes. So making sure that we had a significant infrastructure that would be able to handle that, and then all the headaches that come with that from a security standpoint with data and access, and how our users are able to maintain the level of efficiency business-wise by being in their office. As you can see, I'm in my own office, so I've been remote since March as well. We're kind of in this position now where our patients are starting to come back to the hospitals. but we still need to have a very front-facing virtual care experience for our users, because we still have some of our patients that just don't want to venture out. They don't want to do anything to put themselves in harm's way, but they have critical issues that they have to take care of, like heart issues and neurological issues and things that need physician attention. So we're still very focused on expanding our virtual care platform. One of the things that happened to me as this transition with COVID occurred is that I was also given another responsibility to handle all the solutions that occur within St. Luke's. So virtual care being one of those major solutions that we're developing and we're growing, and continues to evolve by the half a second. I think I was on 9 meetings this morning in virtual care alone. So huge thing for us. And then how we manage all those biomedical equipment that need to be connected to that virtual care, because just because you're able to see the doc or see the patient, it's being able to actually have effective levels of treatment and levels of care. So lot to do, lots going on. It's nice being remote because I can go from meeting to meeting and take care of that kind of stuff, but I'm in the meeting thing is definitely getting old. I'm looking forward to being able to get back and getting in the trenches and getting in the dirt and doing some stuff. So.
Well, let's hope we can all get back to some semblance of the former normal fairly quickly, although if the figures are anything to go by, maybe a little bit longer than some of us anticipated originally. So
yeah, unfortunately.
Thanks for sharing that, David, and thanks for doing what you do. Rob, on to you, sir, down to Virginia.
Yeah, good day, everyone. My name's Rob Perry. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Carilion Clinic. For those that don't know Carilion, it's a not-for-profit hospital system located in Southwest Virginia. We're the largest healthcare system south of Richmond, and our catchment area is approximately 1 million Virginians and West Virginians. We have a challenge that many of our patients are rural and a lot of times have difficulty getting to technology, and so telemedicine has been a big initiative for us, but it's a real challenge when many people don't have even cellular service, much less high-speed internet. My responsibilities at Carilion are covering the information security department. That's my area. That includes cybersecurity, as you would expect, but also identity and access management, as well as an EHR security team, and of course a GRC team that covers vendor risk assessments and cybersecurity education. And like David and Mike, I also work very closely with compliance and privacy. Some of the same challenges, boy, it's just, hearing them both speak of the challenges, very much echoing, the telemedicine challenges. Of course, we had a huge amount of folks that went remote, and with, again, some of DSL being sometimes the only option, or cellular Wi-Fi for some of our remote workers. It's been a real challenge, but we've come up with secure solutions. And of course, setting up these testing centers. Carilion and Roanoke, the area in general, kind of had a slow start to the whole COVID outbreak. We rushed and scrambled to get ready, but then the surge never really happened when we thought it would happen, when we were starting to see it happen in New York, New Jersey, the other hotspots. But now we're starting to see that I don't think really it's a second wave. It's really just the first wave starting to hit us. So we're really knee deep in it right now.
Yeah, you're in a beautiful part of the world as well. So you may find some of those physicians out there doing their patient consults from the Appalachian Trail or from some of the national parks. At least if I was an MD down there, that's where I'd be taking my calls, I'll tell you. So.
It is very scenic. Yep.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for parting yourself from your responsibilities today, to the three of you. And let's start, if we will, with a couple of questions here. This is an open question to all of you, and we'll start down the list if you like. Mike, maybe you can kick us off. But the same question to all three of you. Can you share, if you would please, the approximate number of IT and IoT assets that you believe you each have at your hospitals, and how many sites they're distributed across, just so we can get a grip of, and understand the magnanimity of the problems that you're facing from an asset management perspective?
Sure. We're still working on our inventory, so I would guess between 8,000 to 10,000 devices right now that we think we have. We'll probably find out we have more than that. We have, I believe, 8 facilities right now with 3 type of administration facilities. We have 11, and we're in the process of 2 more that are going up right now. I think it was Robert or David, I think it was David, we're spread around about 60 miles, 2 square miles. So we kind of own the whole little area here, would be north of the Columbia River border with Oregon. And I think total patient population is 1.2 million, something like that. We don't obviously service all those folks all the time, but we do have a pretty big base. With that being said, some of our locations are spread maybe 30 miles, 40 miles, I think. We're all pretty grouped together fairly close. But we have a lot of devices, a lot of equipment. We're spinning up a physical, like say physical therapy in its own location. So all the devices, equipment needs to go in there. We've got some like a ASC that's popping up. We're gonna have a lot of devices and Internet of Things going into that facility. We have quite a bit. It's constantly growing, constantly adapting. It's a struggle. I think the biggest thing right now, we're in a discovery phase, and that is to find out exactly what we have and what's in our portfolio and start to classify those devices and to make sure we can get risk assessments performed on them and inventory who they are. We have SLAs, we have BAAs if they're needed. So we're kind of very early in that right now. So I'm very curious as we go today to see what's David and Robert are doing as well. But that's pretty much it, I think, for the clinic.
So how are you doing your asset inventory right now, Mike? Is that a spreadsheet, or have you got an asset management program in place to kind of track all of those devices? I've seen everything from, from spreadsheets and paper charts right the way through to sophisticated IT there. So
it's a combination of obviously mostly technical controls. We have slowly transitioned from spreadsheet. I would hate to say that we still have them, but we're not centralized yet. We're getting close. We also have a technical platform that's not really designed for asset management, but we're making it work for asset management right now in the interim. So it's helping us at least get the inventory kicked off. So I would say that's probably 80% of it is there. And then the other 20% is a couple spreadsheets out on the wiki. So it's we've got quite a lot of work ahead of us.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So David, let's move over to you. I know, you've been engaged in the asset management problem for quite some time now up at St. Luke's. Can you share what you're doing about this and how many assets you believe you have?
Yeah, so we've got about 24,000 endpoints split across, like I said, 13 hospitals. And in our physician group, we've got about 450 practices spread around those 60 square miles. And then we've got 23,000 biomed devices that we manage, and they can range from IV pumps to GE MRI machines to the list goes on and on and on. And then from our IoT perspective, we originally had about 1,800 IoT devices. Now we're in the 4,500 range, especially with our virtual care and our inpatient consults and being able to figure out how we manage PPE and not having our providers and our care clinicians get potentially infected with COVID when we had our initial wave of patients. Our IoT inventory went up significantly. I mean, just like Mike, we're using some technical applications like Forescout, and we're a big Microsoft shop, so we've been using a lot of the Microsoft asset inventory tools that help us to truly gather the inventory that's out there. I mean, we're using SCCM and endpoint management and a lot of that stuff. So it's a combination of a lot of things, but we still, unfortunately, even with all the effort that I've worked on for the last 5, 6 years being at St. Luke's, that we're still using spreadsheets in some areas as well. I don't think it's one of those things that you can ever get away from, but our inventory is growing exponentially day by day, and especially with virtual care, it's going to get bigger in the next 6 months. So,
and that's a comment I hear from a lot of CISOs and a lot of CIOs right the way across healthcare globally. Some of the statistics I've seen recently tend to indicate there's a 20% per annum growth in the number of medical devices and other healthcare IoT assets. And obviously,
well, that's it. Yeah, I mean that's I would say that that number is kind of low. I mean, the amount of requests that I get on a weekly, monthly basis about new inventory, a new machine, a new system, keeping up with the volumes that were pre-COVID and are starting to come back. There's the providers have becoming very beholden to making sure that those technical assets are there to help with the care of patients. So I would say probably in the next year, you're going to see even probably a 30 to 35% growth in IT assets because of the need to have a virtual care and a virtual platform that's going to require a significant amount of IoT to keep that running. So
yeah, I think you could be right. The telehealth, telemedicine is certainly going to fuel that existing growth. So,
right.
Great. Rob, on to you, sir.
Yes. So we have approximately 30,000 devices on our network. I'd say of that, 3,000 of those are medical devices, which would encompass maybe 1,000 or so healthcare Internet of Things devices. We're spread across, as I mentioned, the 7 hospitals, which are geographically fairly widely dispersed. And again, some of this is very rural. If you know Virginia at all, very southwest Virginia, Tazewell is a very isolated town. So we operate a small hospital out of there. So some geographic diversity there, as well as a couple hundred, I'd say 200, 250 ambulatory sites, practice sites, trying to, again, cover this community. And so a real challenge from a support perspective of just getting out there and keeping these devices serviced. We actually have partnered with GE, with the medical device manufacturer, to help us with a lot of our clinical engineering, just because they have the footprint in the area, because they help out with some of our competitors. So we're utilizing them, and we also work very closely with many of these device manufacturers as well to keep an eye on things. But as far as how we track it, we're still kind of in where Mike is, where we're spreadsheets to using some tools like just the tools that are pinging the devices and doing simple SNMP queries to make sure that they're healthy. But we really haven't gotten it to the next level. So we are looking at several technologies to help us better manage our IoT. And just as David said, I think we're going to see with telemedicine exploding, the need for more and more of these devices. So it's just getting very difficult to try to manage these devices using the older tools that aren't really designed for this type of management.
Yeah, and of course, compared to your Microsoft asset management tools, Service Center, WSUS, all the rest of them out there, you're talking multitude of different vendors here with a multitude of different appliances, all running different firmware, different versions. So the problem is the problem of asset management, asset identification, and asset management is exponentially bigger than your traditional IT footprint on your networks. So, yeah. And are GE Health, are they managing non-GE devices for you as well, Rob?
They are. That is part of the agreement. But if anyone who has tried this approach knows, vendors don't really like. GE is fine with it, but say competitors to GE are not huge fans of having a competitor manage their devices. So we have to work very closely with those manufacturers to make sure that all the patches are being applied, that service levels are being met. So we have regular meetings with all of the major manufacturers just to make sure they're hitting their targets.
Yeah, and of course, one of the big issues with IoT is the availability of patches, right? So, GE does a good job of tracking those down for you, but, Mike and David, as well, they may attest, a lot of these medical device manufacturers are fairly slow about releasing patches, making them available, testing them, and pushing them out to healthcare providers so that they can be implemented.
Absolutely. As many of them like to hide under the FDA regulations and try to say that they can't release patches due to that. But if you look at the most recent guidance that FDA has come out with, that excuse is very weak. So we are always pushing back on them. And there are a couple companies out there, if you look, that are offering patch, at least if not patch management, vulnerability detection across specifically for medical devices. So we've met with a couple of these companies as well and are looking at what we can do to make sure that these manufacturers are staying up to date with their patches. And if there is an exploit or a vulnerability, that we make sure they're doing something to address it.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm curious to hear what David and Mike have to say about this. We have segmented our medical device network and our IoT devices off of our primary network. So they're at least some level of isolation.
Yeah, I mean, we do that, Rob, is we definitely isolate our biomedical network. And one of the major things that we're doing to your comment about the vulnerability and the patch management pieces, I mean, we partnered with Cylera really to help us with doing that. We initially got the same invitation from GE about helping us with our biomed asset management, and we ran initially right into the wall of our other vendors just not wanting GE to be anywhere near them and don't touch them, especially like Siemens and Varian and those type of companies who have a huge footprint in our environment, said, stay away, you're a competitor, we don't want you to know our secret sauce. The beauty of Cylera is that they really don't have to dive into the secret sauce, and they give you the information. And really what it's done, because Mike brought it up, that about the risk assessment and about assessing each of the vendors, that the major headache, and Rob, you go through this, is they hide behind this FDA accreditation nonsense. And then I throw the 96-page document, the one that constantly gets updated by the newest FDA commissioner, and say, no, this is the frame of reference that you've gotta get to. And what Cylera has done is it really has given me a document that I can just print out, hand to the vendor, and say, look, if you do at least this, that'll at least get you halfway there. Then we can have a conversation about the risk assessment and move forward. But the major headache that I see with the biomedical, especially asset management, is the ones where the inventory is there. However, the devices are offline for weeks, months at a time, that they're not being used all the time. There's not maintenance of those devices by the biomedical teams to keep those things running and up to date. So even though you have the inventory of the asset, once the asset's plugged in, okay, well, now you got to have it reach a compliance standard. And how do you get to that compliance standard when it's a ventilator or an IV pump or a heart machine or whatever the case may be that needs to be used right away? Now you're plugging in the network and you've got to get it compliant, but no patient coding, so that patient safety nonsense that you have to manage, and that's part of what we do in healthcare. And how do you maintain not only just your asset inventory, but also your compliance of all those assets? So
it's very proactive. I hear you.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think I think you raised a very good point there, David, that with an increased number of medical device assets going home with patients when they leave the hospital, or being shipped out with nursing clinical staff to patients in their homes, the management of those devices and tracking of those assets becomes ever more difficult. And it's not just a case of a device being taken from the patient bed and put back on a shelf and maybe put on charge but disconnected from the network. It's a question of a much broader and highly dispersed level of assets. So
we actually dealt with that. We did a pilot program with a particular company in the early stages of COVID that allowed us to listen and look at the deterioration index of individuals that were potentially looking to have COVID. That the test results weren't back yet. Again, it was early stages. I know the test usually took 7 to 8 days to get results back. So we would put this finger device on them to look at the deterioration index. And what we were finding is that halfway through the patient being home, the device would shut off because it would lose power, or the patient would lose it, or they would just disconnect from us, and they didn't want to have any more involvement because they were scared that they were going to get a positive test result and they wanted to hide at home. So it was, how do you manage now, even some of these vendors that hadn't figured out the asset management piece, how to connect it into your systems? How do you manage that to not only maintain the asset, but also continue to engage the patient? So it's been daunting the last couple of months.
Certainly a challenge. Yeah. Mike, over to you, sir. Let's talk about risk management and why is asset management so important in understanding risk on your network?
All right. Yeah. Obviously, asset management. There's a reason it's a key pillar in NIST or COVID 5 or CIS Top 20. If you don't know what you have, then how do you know the risk? So it all starts with the inventory. And that's what we're all struggling with right now. Is it's overwhelming and it's adding. We're getting, as David mentioned, it's just incrementally growing by the week. So asset inventory is critical. We're struggling, right? We have different platforms that have been in what we call legacy, like a legacy culture. And we got these different platforms that worked well in the 90s and early 2000s, but not so much in the year 2020. And it's critically important. For us to identify risk, we got to know what we have. So getting asset inventory in place is critical. For us, a holistic approach, that's how it's all part of vendor management. So I would argue that it's a key pillar under a vendor management program, which most of us in healthcare, I'm still fairly new to healthcare, finding it's quite immature compared to like the financial sectors. And vendor management all starts with, making sure that we're onboarding, we know who that is. What is it an asset? Is it a software? Is it an application? Is it a database? Is it a service? What is it? So it's not just looking at it like an IT, a PC or a server, a Citrix system and something like that. It's the big picture, right? And I just got pushed back yesterday for a system with badge reader. And they're like, well, there's no PHI, and it's not like, well, heck, we need to define a business owner. We need to define a system owner. That's part of your asset inventory, should include those kind of things. The contact information for the vendor, the contact and internal information for the folks that purchase the asset, or when I say asset, that's a service, application, a software. So it's extremely important for us, and that's how we can categorize our assets, right? Is it a medical device? We've even started to branch that out where if it's a medical device, where is it isolated on the network? What type of additional compensating security controls are included because of that asset type? That could get an alerting, that can get an instant response, that can get into how we're going to update the firmware and the operating system different than maybe how we handle our laptops or our PCs. It's incredibly important. As we expand our asset inventory, we're trying to have as many hooks into that as possible. So when we're looking at that golden platform that doesn't seem to exist yet, we're going to be working with Cylera too to try to help us to figure that out. What has all the bells and whistles to it? What if an asset has let's say medical devices, right? We're listening to you folks. It's a huge issue in the medical industry, healthcare industry. What if that GE device has a web portal and they didn't even include the IT department to set it up, and they're all moving that way anyways with the cloud for management interfaces? How do we inventory that? How do we make sure that the employees didn't register a username or a password or credentials that are in violation of our policies? How do we make sure we even know that they have access to it? So I mean, we are constantly maturing and expanding our asset inventory concepts to be holistic in understanding risk across the entire enterprise, right? 0 days. How do we know if a 0 day came out? David and Robert were talking about the medical devices. Who's doing that? What's that threat intelligence feed? Who's looking at that? And then who's taking that information to that internal entity that's responsible for ensuring that 0 day or that critical CVE is addressed on that Philips or GE device? We're struggling with that right now as well. So, I'm kind of rambling, but with the asset inventory, it's critical, I think, for all organizations to, it's a key pillar. The more mature that is, if you can get this, CIS top 20, right? You can get the top 5 into an 80-20 maturity state. You can kind of start breathing a little bit to look at the other things. It all starts with asset inventory. How do you know what risk assessments you have to do? You got PCI, you've got HIPAA, we've got various state and regulatory requirements that need to be addressed. So it all starts with our asset inventory. We're still working on that. We're maturing it. We've got a subcommittee that was formed just on vendor management So that gets into developing a software and services policy. Part of that policy, when you go down into the weeds, gets into ensuring that all assets are onboarded. What's that entity? We've established a centralized resource for across all departments, and that's through our help desk, which isn't the greatest thing right now, but it's the best we have to at least start to get everything funneled into one spot, so we can then start to parse out those assets. Where do they go? How are we going to inventory them? What are all the checks and balances need to be included with them? How do we tie that into HR? How do we tie it into onboarding a new employee? How do we tie it into a removal of an employee's job change, or they're no longer working with us? Is that asset tied to that? BAAs, annual reviews of our BAAs, service level agreements, non-disclosure agreements. Can we tie it into those? Do we have a checkbox, which we do? You know, we're expanding this. Right now it's a spreadsheet, but we're looking for that software to do all this. That, you know, we can say, hey, we've got this weight machine that's now a smart, it's a smart weight machine. How about a smart toilet? We've got a smart toilet now. Legacy was a dumb toilet. Now it's a smart toilet. It can take the feces and turn that into data and transfer that data out into the cloud, back to Spain, to the medical device manufacturer, zip it back to the laptop on a doctor's desk all in a few minutes. How do we make sure that we've inventoried that, the web portal associated with it, whether or not we have a BAA on file and it's actively on file? Let's hook that into our BAA platform, our service contracts platform. So yeah, we've got a lot of cool things we're looking for. We haven't found that.
A lot of cool things, including smart toilets, Mike. It's the first time I've heard that mentioned in a
yeah. They're coming to a house near us. Everybody's laughing about it, but I would predict in 5 years that a smart toilet will be probably in every medium income household, new houses. You know, analyze your feces, tell you whether your cholesterol is up or down, whether or not you should buy that pizza tonight. It's very, very interesting. And healthcare is leading the way with all these Internet of Things, right? Continually expanding. So it's so important for us to make sure the organization knows we have it in our portfolio and we're managing them correctly. So it's really critical for us right now, all of us. Yeah. And I'm very excited about what Cylera is doing, at least to get us going on inventory, what we have.
Yeah, and I think as the number of assets increases, continues to increase exponentially, as David, you know, attested, you know, the level of machine learning automation is going to be critical in order to manage this process, because you need to add 100 people to your team just to go do this manually, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm looking at that too. That's something that, and people can ping me. I seriously, if we had an open checkbook, right? Remember, we have NOCs and SOCs, right? Security operations centers and network operations centers, and those took off in the early 2000s, and we have one now. We have an MSP doing things for us. Awesome. If I just wanted to outsource the entire medical device arena, right? Or all of it, right? HIoT. We can't even find an entity in the world that truly does that. There's pieces of it. So I'd love to have you guys ping me later if you guys found somebody. Cylera is a component of it. I think Cylera and the concepts that they bring are going to have a major piece, but not only just inventory, right? Then risk assessments, it tells us what's wrong. What if we want someone to fix it too? We want to outsource all that. I want to just come up to a liaison officer, a director of software and services, and say, you know, show me that we're PCI attestation, show me the HIPAA. You know, here's the risk assessments for HIPAA risk assessment from each year that we do. How did we rate on our healthcare Internet of Things? We get a 0 day, we get a CVE critical score. Who can we ping real quick to go get that figured out and work with GE or Simmons or whoever to get that addressed, you know, as soon as possible. It doesn't seem to exist. And then if we're going to try to onboard an department, our own department, a biomed department, let's say. So you got clinical components, you've got operation components, security, compliance, and IT. I'm curious how you guys are all doing it. How can you afford it? And how can we afford not to look at that SOC NOC type design in the future? And maybe someone like Cylera on the back end could help us with those kind of things. So.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think you raised a couple of points I wanted to pick up on before I move over to Rob for our next question. One is the compliance aspect. A lot of healthcare covered entities are not aware that if a medical device contains PHI, then it is subject to HIPAA, and OCR may well ask for assessment that you performed a risk analysis against those medical devices, which is, something that by and large most healthcare entities are amiss, during their compliance work. And the second point is the importance of third-party vendor management here, right? You need to hold your vendors to account. You need to ensure that they are meeting service level agreements around, the discovery, risk assessment of their devices and making patches available, particularly as medical device manufacturers move to COTS operating systems, running Windows XP embedded, for example, which I found delivered on a packaging crate in a hospital, back in February before we all got locked down. So they're still, these devices, brand new devices, are still being released with Windows XP embedded on them. And I think a final point there is really around the need to not just remediate those risks that are discovered once you've conducted an appropriate risk assessment, but to look at compensating security controls. The importance of putting in place blocks, stops, measures to prevent the bad guys from attacking those devices, using them as a foothold on the network to attach the EMR, for example, or to attack patients. And with that, I wanted to, since we're running a little bit short time here, I wanted to move over to Rob to ask Rob about, what is he doing at Carilion around the management of those of his IoT assets that he described earlier, and how is Carilion managing compliance in that perspective? What compensating controls is Carilion putting in place, and what's the long-term view out there in Virginia?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we are partnered with GE for handling a lot of our day-to-day, what would typically be clinical engineering type work. And we do work very closely with the medical device vendors to make sure that they are keeping up to date with patches. But it is definitely a challenge that we are looking to improve upon. And if, there certainly is the tool that will let us scan for patches that are missing. But in addition, we're also looking at options like, can we do better scanning of each individual network port, network access control, for example, or having in the separate medical device network a micro-segmentation strategy, so that if you start seeing a particular device connecting to a device that has never connected before, that'll trip a sensor. These are things that we need to really tune into our SIM. And so that's kind of been our focus for now. But we have a journey ahead of us. I think much like Mike said, we're not where we want to be, and it's really just prioritizing what are the greatest risks to the organization and biting off those big chunks, and then trying to strive for perfection, doing the 80-20 rule, just trying to get what is the most important or most serious risks handled while we iterate through the known list of issues. And Mike, as you list them off, it's like those are my nightmare. What keeps me up at night, all those list of things, some of those of which we've handled, some of which are a work in progress. So I wish there was someone I could transfer all the risk to. So Mike, if you find that company, please send me a name.
We're working on it.
Yeah.
Well, maybe someone's attending the conference here today. It's going to reach out to you both afterwards with a few solutions, including my sales team probably. But there you go.
Absolutely.
David, on to you to wrap up this session here today. I know that healthcare IoT security is a journey, and both Mike and Robert are in different parts of that journey right now. I know this is something that you at St. Luke's embarked upon a number of years ago. Can you share, why St. Luke's prioritized medical and IoT device security, and some of the reasons for that decision, and what you've done to manage that to date?
Yeah, so there's a few reasons why we did it. I mean, the first being obviously what Mike and Rob have been talking about is the asset piece of it, is that significant number of assets in an environment, 90% of them are connected to the network. The other 10% extrapolate data in some way, shape, or form that moves over to the EMR. So need to get a good handle of the assets. The other big pieces of it is vendor management, contracting, and research. So the vendor management piece of it is, as Rob and Mike have talked about, we needed to be able to get our vendors to become partners with us in order for us to make sure that what we were delivering to our patients was safe and secure. I mean, that's when you look at Hahnemann, you look at some of the other auditing companies out there that have looked at what happens if an organization has a breach, especially in healthcare. There's a 39% loss of patients overnight. So that was another huge reason why we needed to really get our arms wrapped around our biomedical inventory as well as our IoT inventory to make sure that we truly understood what the impact was going to be back to our organization. The other big thing is it's a contractual obligation. I mean, how many times have we talked about the Target breach, Home Depot, Sony, the list goes on and on and on, and we don't know who the third-party vendors were that actually caused the breach of those organizations. So one of the biggest things that I put in front of our legal department, our chief counsel and I talk pretty much every single day. He'll text me at 11:30 at night on issues and things. But what I got him to understand is that if we have the ability to contractually get our vendors to have some skin in the game and to have their cyber insurance take part of the hit when it comes to overall breaches, if they do occur, they tend to be much more willing to fix the problems that we've identified and fix the asset inventory, fix the risk management pieces, fix the patching and things like that. So we really took, once we realized that it was a major issue, which anyone who is in healthcare for about 10 seconds knows that biomedical equipment is the leering hole in any good security program. Once I got my business to really see that, the true driver of it was them. They needed to get the research. They needed me to show them that GE, Varian, Siemens, all these companies are constantly being hacked, and that individuals were taking over breathalyzers and IV pumps and MRI machines and causing major harm to patients. Once they saw that in the news, once they saw the research that I would present to them, then it became a business driver. The business finally started to say, okay, we want to take a much more proactive approach in how we manage our biomedical equipment. So really, it was them about 1.5 years ago during one of my many meetings with the board where one of the board members said, what are we doing about our biomedical devices and when are you going to have a solution for us? And that's really what's allowed us from not only an asset inventory, but from a security standpoint to really be able to clean up our biomedical inventory.
Good stuff. Thanks for sharing that, David. It's certainly an interesting journey. I think we've got time for one question here. I've got one that came through. Sometimes the struggle is that IoT and medical device vendors just say they can't provide the level of security that is required. How do we hold them to account? If they say that they can't perform the relevant patches or updates, what can hospitals really do? They can't afford to repurchase new devices from new suppliers. And that's from Emran. Any comments, quick comments down the line? Mike, you want to start?
No contract.
Oh, David, go ahead.
We're all on the same boat. I will say good luck. We're all in it together. We need to have like a union so we can hit them all with a hammer at the same time. Compensating controls. You're gonna have to dig deep internally, and that's segmentation, that's compensating security controls, administrative, technical, and physical.
Yeah, I would say along with that, you have to go into the legal realm of it. You have to put their financial pockets in the game. You gotta get them to pony up to the table money if there's an issue. So yeah, they may not be able to do a patch, but if you tell them that they're gonna have to spend $5 million when we have a breach to help with breach issues and to deal with incident response with us, it's pretty powerful how all of a sudden now it's, all right, we'll figure out how to do that patch. So that's what's been successful in some areas for us.
Yeah, and when you have the CISO at the meetings with the vendors, at the QBRs, asking the hard questions, they know you're involved and they realize they can't just talk it, smooth it over. It's something they're going to have to deal with, but I completely agree with both.
Yeah, so a combination of administrative and technical legal controls in this regard. Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We've reached our time here. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and insights and sharing your journey with our attendees today. And I'm sure if there are any additional questions, please feel free to raise them, and we'll pass those on to Mike, David, and Robert.